Hi, I'm Katie, and welcome to Hey It Gets Better. This is the podcast where I chat to people about the ups and downs of their lives and how they got to where they are now. Life can be pretty tough sometimes, there's no escaping that fact. But at Hey It Gets Better, we're all about talking about the journey. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and remember, hey, it gets better. Hi, welcome to Hey It Gets Better. Today I'm joined by Liam Chennells. He's a former rugby player who's worked in retail and e-commerce and is now on his new venture, which is going exceedingly well, as CEO of Detected, which is bringing trust to e-commerce platforms and is pretty spectacular. So welcome to the podcast, Liam.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. So I think there's going to be a lot to unpack today, and I'm just going to jump right in with the first question I always ask everyone, which is, to get to where you are now, which is the CEO of an up-and-coming company that is doing exceedingly well, what challenges did you have to overcome?
We've got an hour for this podcast, right?
Yeah, so we can go, we can, you can take it anywhere you want, because I can expect, like most people, there's been a few challenges.
Yeah. What's the biggest challenge? I think actually working out who I am has been the biggest challenge, because, you know, from going away to boarding school with like a ton of pressure to do well there, to then playing sport, to then being in sales jobs, where I've had to be super competitive and win against a group of people. And there's always this thing of winning and everything else. I've had to wear different hats. And I think that probably made me not really know who I was, because I was on this weird journey of trying to understand who I had to be for the scenarios that I was in. And I think things are going, you know, in context well now. And they're going so well because I know exactly who I am and what I stand for and how I operate and what I'm about. So of all the challenges that I've faced, and there's been numerous, I think that's the biggest one that I've sort of confronted and overcome. So yeah, knowing who I am. Yeah, so okay, I hope I don't get this wrong, but you are in your 30s, right? I am indeed. Yeah, thanks for reminding me.
No, because I was thinking when you say that, everyone's kind of like, a lot of my listeners are in their 20s, and I'm in my 20s myself. And I think the time in your 20s can be really confusing because you actually don't really always know who you are. And I guess, like, how do you find out who you are, especially when you're in so many different situations, like you're doing new jobs, you are in new environments, you're in a global pandemic. How would you say you find out who you actually are?
It's a fascinating question, because I don't think there's a rule book for how to do it, and I think different people will do it at different times. So for me to work out who I was, you have to work out who you want to be to a certain extent, because when you're wearing all these different hats in all these different situations, you don't know, right? You don't know who you are, and you feel lost, because there's the whole thing in your 20s of, I need to get on the property ladder, I need this job to validate me. You know, if I'm finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend, they need to be like this. And you just get pulled from pillar to post with all these like future ideas of who you want to be. So I think I went through the process of sort of going back to basics a little bit and thinking, right, the people that I respect, what do they love about me? Because they're probably the things that I'm good at, right? So I've got this rule where I'm the sum of the average of the 5 people I spend the most time with. So I try and make sure I spend time with brilliant people. Then I thought, what is it that those people would sort of see in me that they'd love and cherish and adore about me? And that process is quite a challenging one, because you expose yourself for your flaws. And by working out what other people want from you, you settle on the things that you want to demonstrate every day. So for me, it's really important that I'm honest, that I'm caring, that I'm trustworthy, and that I'm hardworking, right? If I take those 4 things. As long as I demonstrate those characteristics every day, the right people find their way into my life. And that's the way it's happened. So Yeah, I suppose the short answer to your question about how do you find out who you really are, you've got to think about what you want to be and what comes most naturally to you, and work to tie those two things together. Yeah, does that make any sense? I hope it does. It makes sense to me in my head.
Yeah, I know it does make sense. And I think as well an important kind of thing to add to that is that it's going to take time as well. And I think sometimes as well you probably are going to make mistakes on it. But it's never too late to kind of return to those characteristics, I think, as well.
Yeah, and your situation. So I'll give you an example. I was living in San Francisco, and I was managing director of a 70 million turnover business in Silicon Valley, and I found myself on a G650 private jet flying around the world. And the people that I was right, and we did on one of the trips we did Dubai, Melbourne, Queenstown, Sydney, Cambodia, Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Milan, London in like 13 days, seeing investors and stuff. And that's out of this world for me. Like, it's never something I thought I'd do. And during it, I remember this story. I went into this hotel in Singapore, and I said to the guy that was, responsible for the trip, I was like, look, I need to wash some clothes. Do you know that if there's a laundrette near here? He was like, nah, just put it through the hotel. And I was like, right. It's going to be quite expensive. This hotel, look at this hotel we're staying in. It looks like a palace. I said, I don't want to do it here. I'll go to a laundrette. It's absolutely fine. He's like, well, the company pays for it. I'm like, I don't care if the company pays for it. And he's like, no, honestly, just get check-in, just give them your bag and they'll just clean everything and it'll be put back in your suitcase. And I thought maybe, okay, it's something that comes with the hotel. The invoice was in the suitcase when the suitcase came back to my room, and it was £840.
What?
And what I found when I was with people like that and around that sort of stuff is I started to become flippant with money or not realizing the value of stuff. And there's been a ton of scenarios like that in my life where I just suppose that I got dragged into the situation that I was in, and it literally, I'd check myself and be like, what am I thinking? Why? Like your core principles get tested in so many different scenarios, especially in your 20s. Because, you get promotions, all this sort of stuff starts to happen. And we're not taught to deal with it. We're not equipped when we're at school with processes and methodologies to make sure we retain who we are when we're getting dragged left and right. So yes, I completely agree with you. It is difficult and it does take time, and there will be times when it slips. So it's good to check in with yourself. But you need those good people around you to do that. If you don't have people that are honest with you, you're never going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think good people is like essential. That sounds like a movie scene, like going around the world.
It was, and like that year I flew 190 times, and there's people in my family tree that have been abroad once, right?
Yeah.
So it's very strange. It was like a movie scene. There were some crazy things, like some of the stuff I just couldn't believe was happening. And it got to that. That's why I did a sabbatical at the end of 2019, because I've just had all this crazy life, this like sort of businessman, I suppose, for want of a better term, life of flying into cities to have a meeting in an airport and then flying out. It's just not me. I didn't really enjoy it at all.
That's good that you kind of recognize you didn't enjoy it, because I mean, when you think about what is kind of taught to us as like the pinnacle of success, what success looks like, the the big job, the flying around, like some people would say that is success. And to be able to recognize that actually that's not for you, and have the confidence to move a step back and have a sabbatical from it and find another path, I think that takes a lot of confidence in yourself and in your ability to recognize what actually you see as success.
Yeah, it's success is a fascinating thing, because I think I've always strived really hard to make sure that I'm a success, because I like the challenge. It's really not an ego thing for me. If nobody knew that things were going well for me, that would also be just fine. It's actually just thinking, right, there's something that I'm going to put my mind to. I want to make sure that I can get to that objective. That process is fine for me. And there's the notion of never being satisfied. And it's in the DNA of people that do great things typically, because I remember when I was in my early 20s and I got a job paying a certain salary, and my mum was like, well done, you've done it. And I was like, I haven't though. Like I've already forgotten about that promotion and that pay rise. I've forgotten about it. I'm thinking about what's next now. And that's just the way that some people are wired. And I used to get a little bit frustrated by it, because I'd be like, right, I need to stop and think and respect the fact in myself that I've done this thing. But now I just know that it's me. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like next, like my focus is on making other people successful now. So yeah, it's a fascinating one, because you can quite easily go through life just chasing and being really, really, really frustrated as you do that. Now I chase, but I don't get frustrated at all, because I know that it's how I'm wired. So I don't mind. I'm cool with it.
That's a really good level of self-awareness, I think. And that's something from recording all these episodes and talking to all these people, is I've realized self-awareness and actually knowing what makes you tick and what you enjoy, but also like you say, how you're wired is so crucial to kind of finding your path, because everyone is different. And I mean, you can read all the success books in the world, but if you don't know how you are yourself, it's very hard to apply those principles and be satisfied or even happy like with the results.
Yeah, it really is. And one of the things that I've sort of would describe as one of my superpowers now is that exact thing. Knowing what works for me, knowing what doesn't work for me, knowing when I need a break, knowing when I can step things up. And a lot of the people around me are like, you're going to burn out. Like you take today, for example, right? So it's 10:15. I was up at 5:30 working, and I went running at like 6:15, and I've been working ever since, and I'll also be working at 11 tonight, and I was last night. And it's not to glamorize overwork, but it's just the way I am. But what I've realized is that there's certain times when I do need to completely take my foot off the gas. And for me, that might be just doing video calls from on my sofa rather than at the desk. And I know that disconnect from the sort of desk, I see it as a break. So despite the fact that I'm working, I, in my mind, feel that that's a break, and that's enough for me. I make sure I go walk twice a day during the day and do. So I've built up this like toolkit that I deploy when I need it. Because if you just bludgeon through and you don't consider how you're feeling, you don't consider what impact the things that you're doing are having on you, it'll probably be too late, and you'll get into some pretty dark spots. And the prevention's always better than the cure, right?
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And also I think it's a challenge as well to the typical 9-to-5 lifestyle that I guess when you grow up and you haven't been working, you really that's what you kind of expect, 9 to 5. And when you become an entrepreneur, you're self-employed, or even you find something you love, what others may see as working, you may see as something that gives you a lot of joy, a lot of happiness. And so your typical break will probably look different to someone who's kind of working a job they hate.
I completely agree with you. And I suppose there's 2 points on this. So the first point is that from the Industrial Revolution came the 9 to 5, right? Cavemen didn't just work on Monday to Friday and have their evenings and their weekends off, right? This is something that's been factored in maybe before the Industrial Revolution, but whatever. Let's just say it was cemented then. Like you go to the factory in the day, you do the work, you come home. Some people, they get their enjoyment from going to a pub. Some people get their enjoyment from going cycling. Like it just happens that I get my enjoyment predominantly from the thing that you would call my work. So on a Sunday afternoon, when I'm sat doing some forward thinking stuff, there's nobody emailing me. So I've got the chance to take stock of what's happening and take a little bit of a step back. Like that's great fun. And I absolutely love doing it. So that's one part. the other part, the 9 to 5 is a really interesting one. So we started the business in the pandemic. So it was registered at the end of July 2020. And we haven't had an office. So there's a lot of people that haven't met each other. So we're gonna get some sort of space in June. And we had a bit of a workshop the other day, and maybe 6-7 of the team were round at my place. And I said, how do you want to do it? I said, what do you mean? I said, how do you want to do this office? What do you mean? And I said, do you want to say that we work from 7:30 till 2? And the first hour of the day is us doing market research, presenting to each other what's going on in the market that we serve, watching TED Talks, just having breakfast and having a laugh. And then when we have a serious project that we need to get done, we shift it and we work from 2 p.m. till 7 p.m. all in the office 4 days a week. There are no rules where this is concerned. Like, why would I just set up an office and say it's 8:30 till 6 every day? Like, why? People can't concentrate for that long, and it's just the way it's always been done. So I suppose the big thing is that there's rules and there's laws. Like, stick to the laws, because they're put in place to keep people safe, and the police enforce those. But rules, without wanting to sound like an anarchist for the sake of it, who cares? Like, do you have to write regards at the end of an email? I don't think so. Like, it's not a letter. It's not a piece of parchment. What are you playing at? Just say, I hope you're having a lovely day. You know what I mean? Like, we go through life, like, seeing other people doing stuff and just copying it. Like, care about people, be kind to people, have that lead how you do things, but don't follow stuff. Like, the world would be really boring if everybody just followed stuff, and it wouldn't progress. So yeah, just my view on the 9 to 5 and how we approach that, and the fact that the term should just disappear forever, quite frankly.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was Henry Ford who brought it in. So you're right with the Industrial Revolution, and it just does not work. And I think people, especially for like creative roles and kind of when you have to think outside the box, if you're trapped in that set hours, like, it doesn't work. Because what happens when you've got that bright idea at 8 o'clock and you just want to work on it? And I think that degree of flexibility that you bring in with how you're setting up your work, your team, and how they're working is going to allow for moments where things can really thrive. And if everyone follows the rules, like you say, everyone follows the rules, they sign their emails the same way, they dress the same way, we're all going to look the same, and we're going to lose what's special about us.
So you'll love this. So when I joined the company in America, on one of my first days, I said to the sales team, I was like, why are you all wearing checkered shirts and chinos? And they were like, what do you mean? I'm like, have you been told to wear this? No. Okay, cool. So did you just finish school, and when you went into a job, they're the clothes that your parents bought you and you all wore the same? Because I said, tomorrow, can you just wear your own clothes? And they came in and they looked great and they were all happier. Like, we just conform out of, I don't really, I think I'm thinking about what happens in my life, right? I'm quite excited about the future. I'm loving the present, but I'm excited about the future. And one of the things that I'm really, really passionate about is the fact that the education system doesn't actually build brilliant adults. It just puts kids into boxes and gets them to achieve certain grades that continues the school's funding, and it doesn't improve society. I think it's massively flawed. Definitely. And it's something I'm really passionate about changing, right? So if you think of school versus work, at school, you go to school and you are rewarded for obedience predominantly rather than performance. And I think in work, it's not dissimilar. So you can combine the two, right? So if you've got a target, you hit a target, but you're never really rewarded in work for creativity and innovation and changing the agenda and pushing things forward. So I think they're actually intrinsically linked. And until we sort schools out, we're probably not going to sort work out, because there won't be that many kids turning into adults that think critically and for themselves. So the fact that at school, people say, come here at 9 o'clock. Look, I get that there's the function of it has to happen at some point during the day. But if you look at a kid that's 7, planner about what their day looks like. You will learn science at this time. You will learn religious studies, which is a whole other thing entirely, which I'm happy to open that Pandora's box, but I'm a pretty strong atheist for a ton of different reasons. But anyway, like, you will learn this thing at this time, and we will judge you based on how you do compared to every other kid in the country who's also learning that thing at that time. To think that kids lack individuality to that extent is mind-blowing. And there's a friend of mine who's a musician, and his son goes to a school that's almost Scandinavian in its approach. And it says the kids come to school and we just give them time to spend with each other. And we guide them through how they can use the interactions they have to teach them how to be great people. That's brilliant. Like, you can infuse like social interaction with learning. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I just wish that would start there, and then we'd change the way the world works. Because nothing's going to change if we all think the same.
Definitely.
Right?
I mean, I look back to what I did in my, in school, which even wasn't that long ago. I can't remember anything, because it was just going up. I would show up, I would study really hard, come home, memorize it, regurgitate it for exams, and then that's it.
So I'll tell you a story about about my performance at school. So I sold all my textbooks in like the January of my A2s, which is your year 13 exams, final exams. I sold all my textbooks because I wanted money, right? And I remember in my psychology A-level exam, before it, everyone else was on study leave, right? So everyone else is staring at their textbooks and getting all stressed out. And I was outside playing basketball because it was sunny, because your exams are in the summer. And I remember in psychology, everyone was stressing out because they had to remember the date of the studies that prove the theories in the book. So, for example, Pavlov's dog, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And they were like, when was Pavlov's dog? 1870? And they were all stressing about, remember? And I was like, right, let's think about it. The people that mark exams are teachers. Teachers are marking exams for extra money. If you can prove that you have used sound logic to explain a point, they are not going to check who the person is that did the study and what year they did it. They will just tick it, because they are ticking hundreds of exams a night. And I remember sitting in the exam, and it was about body dysmorphia. And I made up a study. And the guy sat in front of me was called Isaac Thompson. And it was Thompson et al. 1922. And it was that two twins were separated at birth, and one lived in a house that had mirrors in it and one didn't. And I got a B, right, at psychology A2, because I just used my brain, right? And I was happier. Everyone was stressing because they had to regurgitate information. And I look at what a lot of those people are doing now, and they're sat in companies regurgitating information. And look, I know that isn't for everyone, and I know that there is merit in, being studious and taking everything into account and being able to deploy, correct information. But there's also a lot to be said for being enterprising and working out what the system is and how. And it's put me in good stead. And I'm not trying to suggest that being an anarchist is always the right way, but being a critical thinker definitely is. Like, thinking about the situation and deploying your skills. Because I knew I couldn't remember it all, but I knew I could be creative. So that's the decision that I made.
100%. Like, you're 100% right, I think, with critical thinking and question stuff. I think this is the thing, like, we don't question stuff enough anymore. And I don't mean like question it, like go on Twitter and be that person nitpicking everything. Like, don't be that person, but question the big stuff. Like, question why you do something. Like, I remember when I found myself without a job last year, and I was like, okay, I'm going to start applying for jobs. And I just was like, actually, why? Why am I going to go apply, like work for another company when I can work for myself? And when you put that question in and you learn, that helps you learn what you value, because you question the stuff that, is stopping you get to who you want to be. It also opens new opportunities for you, because if everyone goes down the same road, it's going to be a very boring journey because you know exactly what's going to happen.
So when I came back from, let me illustrate the point that you've just made perfectly well. And you've done brilliantly with what you've done, and all the work that I've seen you do has been incredible. So you've definitely made the right choice to not be bound by having somebody else telling you what to do, because it doesn't suit you. So well done, I suppose, for making that choice. What happened when I came back from my sabbatical is that I had all these job opportunities, you know, because I've held some senior positions, whatever. And I was like, actually, do you know what? Can't be asked. No interest. I think now's the time. I set up a couple of things before, they'd gone okay. And what actually ended up happening was the pandemic started. And because of some of the connections that I've got in e-commerce and logistics, I was chartering planes and boats to move medical equipment around the world, which, fine, sure, helping in a pandemic. And I was going to give up because all of the people in there were complete scumbags. Like, I spoke to King Rashid of Morocco, the guy that runs Carlos Slim's family money. I spoke to the CIA. I spoke to the Vatican.
Yeah.
Like, you name it, I did it, right? And then my aunt passed through COVID. So I was like, right, do you know what? Sod this. I'm actually going to sort this thing out. It was a bit of extra motivation. And what I decided to do was to create a marketplace. And on that marketplace, all the buyers and the sellers were going to be verified within like an inch of their life. And then I thought, actually, sod that. Who makes the rules? To your point, why is there no standard on marketplaces around the world that's a little icon that you can tap that says, this business has these credentials? So it has a good credit rating. None of its directors have, committed crimes in the past. There's no court judgments against them. They've filed their accounts. And that's how this business started. And since then, obviously, it's done what it's done, and we're all really happy. But that came from me sat at home being like, nah, I'm not just going to do the thing that's always been done. Let's do something new. And it's been one of those ideas where people are like, why didn't I think of that? And my answer is always, you didn't think of that because you weren't thinking. I put something on my Instagram the other day on a reel, or the other week. It was like that everybody says, oh, you know, the guy that created the cat's eyes, he got like 2p for every one. Such a simple idea. I wish I'd have thought of that. And my point was, have you invested in the sensors on autonomous vehicles? And the answer is always no, because people like to complain about what they haven't done rather than do stuff. So yeah, that might seem like an overly critical opinion on people's thinking, but it's pretty common. And I think the more that, people like you who think like it and people like me that think about it, air these things and give people examples, the more it will influence people to think critically and to make bold decisions and do things that nobody's ever done, which I think is what the world needs.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, one thing to say is it's not too late to start thinking that way and thinking differently. It's never too late to do that. Read books, I'd say, listen to podcasts, pay attention to like what people are saying on social media, like follow the right people. And when you broaden your horizons and you intake knowledge, but you also think about that knowledge, that the things you're learning, don't just consume and think about it. Then you can start to actually think critically. And it doesn't matter whether you're 19 or 29 or 59, you can still do it.
It really doesn't. Yeah. So one of the things that I do is I bounce my ideas off people in different worlds. And what I mean by that is, if you work in venture capital, you only speak to your venture capital friends about what you do. So I work in technology, broadly speaking. I could quite easily only talk to people in technology about what I do, but I don't. And to illustrate this point, since Detected was an idea, I go to the same coffee shop every day, and I've walked there. And every day I've told the guy in the coffee shop about what's happening. And the reason I do that is because it's great to make conversation and to share what you're up to. And, I loved learning about his coffee shop as well, because it was a brilliant two-way conversation. But he gave me feedback, thoughts and considerations on what we were doing that aren't from a big technology company or a big marketplace or a big venture capital firm's point of view. And he hasn't realized it, but he shaped a lot of what we're doing. And I do the same when I go to my barber, and I do the same when I'm in a petrol station. I just talk to people and get their opinions and feedback. And what's amazing is that 2 weeks ago, he was like, right, I've had enough. Can I invest in the company? I'm like, yeah. And he's put a lot of money into this company. So there's all these like secondary benefits that come from sharing what you're doing with anyone. But the key thing is that it helps you to understand a broader like opinion on what you're doing, validate your ideas, test your theories. It's a really powerful skill to have, to not just tell people in the world that you're in about the world that you're in, to like expand it and to bring more people along for the journey.
Definitely. And I think as well for like people listening, in your early 20s, when you're, you can still do this if you're not even like a CEO, like of something. I mean, I do this like, I do this all the time.
Oh, trust me, where I've come from and how bad my life's been at various parts of my career, like can't see a way out, like bad. If I can do it, seriously, anybody can at any age. Sorry to interrupt you, Katie.
No, I think that's a really good point though. Like, I mean, you've worked extremely hard to get to where you are now, Liam, and I think as well, you weren't born into wealth.
The opposite.
Yeah. And that's really important because I think, for people who aren't necessarily born into wealth, you see people be successful and it's like, oh, how did you start your company? And it's like, oh yeah, my dad gave me the startup. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Do you know what? I also don't begrudge people for having that. And I think if you've come from nothing and you've made something for yourself, a lot of people resent people that did have something. But my view is like, cool, man. Like you got a leg up. That's amazing. Like I wish I had. I don't actually, but like I'm never resentful. What's the point? Like just because I didn't have it, it means it's rubbish that you had. Like no way. Like if I think of, so if anyone's listening to this and they think CEO cool, like done his thing, I'll give you a scenario that was 10 years ago to give you the other side of things, right? So I was working in the city, I was working in sales, and I was having to ring 200 people a day, okay? And this is my standard day. No money in my bank, let's just start with that, none. Because I was on 12 grand a year, which is almost slave labor, really, if you're living in London. So after my bills, I had £200 a month to live on. So if I got the train to work, I couldn't feed myself. So I was like stealing from takeaways and all sorts. Like I just had nothing. So I'd wake up at 5. I had to ride a push bike 9 miles by the Gherkin. And then for 12 hours, I was cold calling people, getting told I was a prick. Like I remember one example, I rang a company and they said, if your company rings my company again, we'll brick your windows. And I put the phone down. I was like, oh, for God's sake. And my boss was like, what happened there? I was like, they said that they'll brick our windows if we called them again. And he dialed the number, handed me the phone, and he said, tell them why they're not going to brick our windows. I was like, for God's sake. And I was so like desperately sad. I'm doing these things really hard. And then I'd get on my bike at the end of the day and I'd ride home back to this awful, awful place I was living. And I'd go to sleep and I'd wake up and do it again. But I did it and I did it and I did it and I did it for months and months and months. And that turned into a year, 2 years. And then stuff started to happen. So it's definitely not been given. And I think about that stuff every day. Every day when I get onto a call and people are really positive without even having spoken to me, but because maybe they've heard something or seen something, like even that I'm just so grateful for, because it wasn't always like that. So yeah, never going to get ahead of myself. Those roots are really powerful. So if you're listening, you're in that phase and you think, shit, I've got no money at the end of the month. I hate my boss. I don't like my work. There's an element of change it if you're not happy about it, but there's also an element of just stick with it, because with time comes experience, and with experience comes relationships and better decisions and all that good stuff. And it does, to quote the title of your podcast, Katie, it does absolutely get better.
I think that's really powerful, and that it, it does. This is the thing, like, it does get better, and that's the reoccurring thing that happens when I talk to people like this, like you, about things like this, is those moments where things are really tough and it's really hard, like, to see that things aren't always going to be like this. Like, to get help can be really hard, but in time things do change, and that's so important.
So the notion of getting help is a really interesting one. And I remember when I was at one of these companies, and it was hell. It was awful. And I remember one day I Googled a list of things that I was feeling. So it was irritable, teary, tired, like all these classic symptoms. And it was like, you've got depression. And I was like, okay. So I wrote them all down in my notepad, and I said to the MD, and I said to my best friend, who was also working at the company, I was living with him as well, I was like, can I have a minute? And he was like, yeah, sure. As long as it's a minute, obviously, because we're meant to be calling people. And went to a meeting room, and I showed these things, and I said, look, Google these things. And then it came up, and it was like, depression. I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
Like, wow. Like, no one was talking about it at this point in time, ever. It was completely taboo. And the MD remarkably was like, cool, because I was making him money, right? Because I was doing well. He was like, okay, well, you get a therapist for that stuff, don't you? And I was like, yeah, I suppose. And then that's when I started getting therapy. And it was incredible, liberating, the most amazing experience of my life. And I actually bumped into the therapist weirdly, like 2 years ago. She walked out of Virgin Active in Notting Hill. I was just walking down the street, and I was like, Sarah. And she was like, Liam. She's like, how are you? And I was like, honestly, I'm brilliant. And I have so much to be grateful for. And we spent 10 minutes talking about it. And it was almost like a turning point in my life, because what happened was she taught me so many things about, when this happens, this is probably why, right? Disconnect from the situation, understand that it's just a thing that's happening and it's not you. And then you can compartmentalize it, and you can deal with it. She gave me these amazing coping mechanisms that I still use every day today. So your point about getting help is spot on, and it's brilliant, and everybody should do it, I think, at some point. Because if we go back to being kids, we're all hardwired in this weird way, typically by people generations above us that haven't had the ability, like we all do, to talk as openly as we do about how we feel and about how things can get tough and that we're struggling. And what happens is, you see it in the media. People, the next generation, are soft. Oh, no, it's not. We're just as soft as you were. We just don't have years of layers that we put on top of how we feel, like you lot have. Because you can be sad at night on your own, but no one sees that down the pub. So that's all they're doing. They're just protecting themselves with these disastrous coping mechanisms. So our generation's not any softer. It's just more open about the things that happen, which is exactly how it should be.
Definitely. I think as well, particularly in terms of like men's mental health, mental health, conversation about mental health, it's slowly increasing, but there's still that stigma around mental health. And in terms of like men's mental health, there is definitely that idea of like, oh, you're soft, and you're not soft. Like,
yeah. Do you know what's mad? In 2012, there was a guy that had a YouTube channel talking about men's mental health, and he messaged me because he'd known me from playing rugby, and we were chatting away, and I saw on his page he had all these followers, and I looked on his channel, and I was like, that's amazing. And he recorded me sat on Hampstead Heath for 18 minutes telling the story about my depression and how bad things got, and being suicidal and all that stuff. And when it came out, all my mates were like, what? Like, you're Liam? That doesn't happen. You're life and soul. And it felt like a bit of a turning point within my friendship group. I still get people that message me to this day saying that they saw that video, because it was candid and frank and honest and everything else. And it has changed. And look, that was 10 years ago. And now I feel old when I say that things were 10 years ago, right? But it has changed. One of the massive frustrations I have is that people don't live what they say. There's a lot, I don't say anything that I don't do, right? And everyone that knows me well knows that. And actually you, from all the work that we've done together, will know that I live all of these things in every bit of work that I do, every bit of opportunity I have to be positive, and all this. It is in what I do day to day, respect and all this stuff. There's a lot of people at the moment that say that, reach out to me if you need a hand.
Yeah.
Talk. Let's all talk. And like, I've had mates recently that say all that stuff, and I try and ask them for help, and they're just like meh, or just they're busy or whatever. Only say it if you're going to do it, because the problem is this movement's brilliant. This movement of people going on a journey towards being more open is brilliant. But if we invalidate it by not living it, it's not going to have as much potency and things aren't going to change. So I'd almost prefer if people didn't say it if they're not going to live it. Like, it's a great message, but do it. Like, yeah. And I make sure that I live it myself, right? So if I'm having a tough time, I ring a friend and I'll say, mate, I'm struggling. Let me tell you why. And sometimes it's just verbalizing it is the thing you need to do to then kickstart your own sort of healing process. But by me doing that with my friends, they then do it with me. And I get my mates calling me saying, hey, dude, like, this has been crap. This week's been really bad. This 2 weeks has been really bad. And if they ever excuse it, I don't want to bore you. No, please stop. You're not boring me, right? And we need to remind each other of all those sorts of things. So, massively passionate about this. I really, really am, as you know, of course. Yeah,
I mean, I agree with it as well. Like, I think there are consequences as well when you push someone away, who feels like that, because the amount of confidence I think it takes to build inside you, to show your vulnerability, to even just pick up the phone, that simple action, it might seem, quite small, but if you have been in bed all week, unable to talk, just crying and feeling really depressed, to do that is a big step. And then if you have someone pick up the phone like, I'm really sorry, I can't talk right now, that's a big knockback. So I agree. Like, I hadn't thought about it before, but it makes, if you're not going to do it, then maybe don't say, just reach out to me anytime, because if they can't, it's going to have that consequence, and it can be quite damaging.
Imagine if you said to someone, imagine if you rang a mate and you were like, hey, come around my house. And they were like, all right, cool. And they travel and they get to your house and knock on the front door and you open it and you just close it again. Yeah.
That's like what it is, isn't it?
It's exactly the same thing. And it's dangerous. And to your point about vulnerability, I genuinely believe that one of the most powerful things you can be is vulnerable. If we take in business, when someone in my team rings me and says, hey, I'm finding this really hard. I don't understand it. I sat on that call and I didn't know what anyone was talking about. Can you take me through it? Respect levels fly up, right? So I'm like, that's awesome. But rather than pretending to save face, you've just rung me and said, that's hard. In a relationship, if somebody's like, the stuff you're doing at the minute, the way you're acting is making me feel like this, and it makes me sad. Brilliant. Like, show that vulnerability, show that weakness. Because if there's people around you that you're vulnerable with that take advantage of that, then they can do one anyway, because they're not the sort of people you need around you. And I know that all the people that I've now got around me respect that I'm vulnerable. And if I say that I'm having a tough time or that something's bugging me or whatever else, they're like, awesome. Like, why? Let's talk about it. And I do the same for them. So be as vulnerable as you possibly can. And you might get burned a couple of times. You might, because some people can't deal with it. Some people will still say, oh, you loser. Oh, well, just learn more then. But that's just not good enough. And you'll realize that those people aren't the people that you want in your life. And then slowly things start to improve. But yeah, please be vulnerable. That's my message. If there's one thing that I share on this, in this chat, that I'd love everybody to do, is be vulnerable. And one more thing on that. If you think about like internet trolls and everything else, like, they don't have the capacity to have their mind changed. They're set in one way. And because of that, sensible conversation doesn't happen. And then because of that, progression doesn't happen. If you're vulnerable, you will let people change your mind. You will let people articulate their point of view without getting angry, because you have a vulnerability. You're allowing that information in, and then it allows you to make a more informed decision. So it's not just in this like true sense of vulnerability, which is sharing weaknesses and saying that things are hard. It's in other ways as well. It's letting people change your opinions, letting people influence how you feel about something. So it's a really powerful thing that I hope is more ingrained in us as we grow up and as we grow old.
And I think that way of living as well is going to help you grow as a person. I think you should 100% always be willing to be open to change, because that's how you're going to grow. And if you don't, like, I don't want to be the same person I am right now in 10 years' time. I want to be... It
wouldn't be a bad thing for the world, Katie, by the way, if you were the same person in 10 years' time. You have a positive impact on the world. So as long as you're you or better, as long as you don't regress...
Gosh, no, I hope it doesn't. No, it's not going to go downhill from here. It gets better. I keep telling myself. But
there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's brilliant. And thank you so much for coming on today's episode. I'm going to end with the question that we end with everyone. And you kind of covered it already, but for someone who feels like it doesn't get better right now, whether it's they hate their job or they don't have the right people around them, they just don't feel like themselves, what would you say to that person?
I'd say two things. The first one, and the one that I always remember when things are tough and busy and confused and sat in my head and not improving, is that there is always blue skies behind the clouds. It's metaphorical, but it's a visual representation of the fact that things will get better. Behind any clouds, there is always blue sky. So that's the first one. The second one is remember what you've done in the past to make things better and prioritize doing those things first. So, for example, if in the past things have been tough and you've increased the amount of exercise you've done, or you've cut out alcohol, or you've spent time with a certain person, prioritize those things and do those things first, because getting better is a journey. And the journey doesn't start unless you put one of your feet in front